Pavilion here at the International Housewares Association show. And now we're going to go a little sci-fi. We're going to go a little out there. It's going to be a lot of fun. I'm sitting here with Dr. Bryce Rudder. He's the founder and CEO of the Metaphase Design Group. And we're going to be talking about haptics, the potency of touch and design. Dr. Rudder, first, give us an explanation of what haptics is.
Just a sense of touch. You just think about your 10 fingertips. You've got over 20,000 receptors just in the very tips of your fingers that are providing real-time feedback on, on textures, on surface characteristics, whether it's sharp, whether it's organic form. And haptics is kind of the global, umbrella under that we look at all of those aspects of how we use our hands to try to create good tactile experiences.
So to give people an understanding, It's like a concrete example. Where might have they come across the work that your company does?
Well, the first things that come to my mind are things like the OralB Toothbrush that has kind of the large rubber handle on it. We did all the ergonomics on that particular design.
And how is that touching back?
If you look at the design of that toothbrush, the places, if you study how people brush their teeth and you look at how they grasp a handle, there's certain spots where the thumb and the index finger always land. And so if you look at that handle, there are specific textures where those two fingertips land. And it's also choked in because we know that you twiddle your toothbrush, much like a surgical instrument or a dental tool. So being able to flip that around and having the center of gravity in the right spot in the toothbrush so it doesn't go flipping out of your hand.
Right.
So those are all kind of haptic issues that we would consider and did consider in the design of that toothbrush.
Okay.
Yeah.
So how does that relate then? How does touch relate to interface design in the kitchen? What do you, how do you see that playing out?
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of glass, and what I mean by glass is, slick interfaces, touch interfaces. In terms of a tactile signature, they don't give you much. So I think that given the potency of touch and how much you can influence how I feel about the product by how it feels in my hand, with the textures and things like that, you've lost that opportunity to convey, that part of your brand when you go glass.
Yeah.
So, but that is, that's the downside. The upside is that you think about the display characteristics, and the universe of options that you have, and having things appear and disappear in terms of graphical user interface controls for your integrated kitchen. I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
But I just miss, I'm a touch guy. I want to have some haptics.
So when you say haptics, you're not just referring to like when I push my button on my phone, I feel a bump, even though there's no bump actually there, right? Like I can feel it feedback. You're also just talking about just the sense of touch and how that can lead people in a particular direction in terms of interface design.
Absolutely. So just to give you an example, we've talked a little bit about texture. If I have a sheet of glass, your fingertip will feel a bump that's only 3 microns high. So to put that in perspective, my wiry gray hair is about 120 microns.
Oh, okay.
All right, so that's a small bump. So, but sensing things that small can greatly influence, what is your perspective on that brand? Is it gender neutral?
Yeah.
Is it ruggedized? Is it sophisticated? Is it cheap? It's the same thing though with sound. We have products that sound cheap.
Yeah.
They may not be cheap, but they have a really weak acoustical signature for those things.
So, a refrain you're hearing a lot here at the show, and you heard at CES a lot, was just the idea of voice interface and voice interaction.
Yeah.
But it seems like in the kitchen that voice is really good for a lot of things, but it's not good for some things, right? Like following instructions. It would be better to have video that you can see and follow along with rather than just hearing.
Yeah.
What are some of the things that touch can do and open up, right? So if we're just talking about different surfaces, or if we're talking about like actual haptic feedback built into utensils or something, what are the ways that what you do can influence sort of the interface to come?
Yeah. So I'm going to start with the easy one first, because we specialize in hand-intensive products. I think of all the utensils, and I think of them as instruments. We also design a lot of medical instruments. So I think the way that you grasp, manipulate, and use each one of those instruments is unique to the task. So I would love to design a set of grips, you know, that really fit and perform. You know, they fit your hand perfectly, and they fit my hand, and they fit your hand, and they fit a small hand, and they fit a large hand, you know, from 5th to 95th percentile. And when you grab it and you do that task, you know, your takeaway is that there's nothing that they could have done to make it any better.
Yeah.
You know, this is as easy as it gets.
Yeah.
So designing in, you know, the grip, the feedback, giving me visual cues so that when I pick it up, I know I'm supposed to grab it here and do this with it rather than that. You know, so I think there's a lot there.
What are some of the things that you've already given us a few factoids that are fascinating in terms of the number of receptors in our fingers or the depth at which we can feel something. What are some other things people might not realize about our sense of touch that can influence the products that they're making?
Sure. One of the common misconceptions that I run across is people say, well, you can do a multitude of things with your hands. So how do you design, you know, a grip, you know, for a particular task? Well, the short story on Hands 101 is that there's three primary grip architectures that we all use.
Okay.
You use a power grip, like with a hammer handle, you know, where you're using the big muscles up in here. There's a precision grip where you're using either 2 fingers or 3 fingers, and you're using the small muscles in your hand that'll get tuckered out fast, but they're very precise.
Yeah.
And then there's the hook grip, you know, you're carrying your luggage around.
Yeah.
So, you know, when you think of all of the potential scenarios, knowing it, being able to whittle it down and say, all right, if this is what the task is, then this is the best grip to use. Now I'm going to design a grip that's going to elicit that grip from you.
Right.
So now I've got a great grip that is biomechanically efficient and it's intuitive and visually obvious to you.
Okay.
Yeah. So I think the utensils is a big area. I think in haptics, you know, with the interface, I kind of go back to appliances that have more of an analog interface, you know, with the knobs and controls and buttons. You've turned a knob that feels cheap, just doesn't have any resistance to it, you know, and sometimes it doesn't even have a good click sound with it. So just that sensitivity to, you know, what is the right torque, what is the gain with the knob and what I'm controlling, you know, in the user interface. I think all of those are high opportunities for really enhancing the user experience, the touch interface, you know.
Yeah, it's funny you say that because when I got a Nintendo Switch earlier this year, and one of the things they built the marketing campaign around was the satisfying click. When you slide it in, and I was like, oh, that's weird. But then I bought it, and I was like, this thing just feels really good in my hands.
Right.
The materials is all it feels very high quality. All the sounds, and all the clicks, and all the feedback, and everything just feels well thought out from start to finish. Yeah,
and all the controls, they just fall naturally underneath your fingertips.
Yeah.
Like, how did that happen?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Do you think that there's a lot of, let me phrase it, well, what are the areas of improvement for people who are making appliances, or even like large and small? What are the things that, you know, so I got somewhere between a power and a hook grip to get open up my refrigerator door. And then the knobs, like you said, on like an oven or something. But what are there new materials that people aren't looking at that maybe they should be looking at, or?
Well, with grips, you know, including some kind of elastomeric material typically helps.
Define elastomeric.
Any kind of rubber.
Okay.
You know, but you don't need that much. So you see some people that'll have an entire handle or entire grip that's all rubber.
Yeah.
When you could have got away with, you know, a little, 2 or 3 little ribs that were co-molded in the product. If people knew where to put the ribs, but they don't, and as a result they say, well, rubber's good, let's put rubber over the entire thing.
Just cover the whole thing.
Yeah, right. But I think rubber adds a really nice component to grip security. The temperature, the temperature of the material has a different hand, if you will. I've had people react to it, in research, and they say it feels human almost. You know, it feels like skin because it has some compression to it.
Yeah.
So I think there's a humanity to the material too that I kind of like.
Is there anything? This is kind of going outside of your field, but not, which is in terms of motion control. So if you think about the kitchen, right? Like I've got my voice, I've got Alexa telling me what to do. I've got videos, but I may have like batter hands, right? And I don't want to touch my screen because I don't want to gunk it up.
Yeah.
and I don't want to necessarily touch something. I don't want to turn the oven knob. Maybe I have raw meat on my hands or whatever. I don't want to spread contamination. Is there anything in sort of the kinetic, like the Kinect, so motion control, that you see playing into the overall design of, you know, touch and no touch?
Like Mission Impossible interface, right?
Yeah,
You
yeah.
know, like Tom Cruise.
Yeah,
you know?
Minority Report. Yeah, where he's flipping things around.
So, yeah, I do, but I think it's out there.
Yeah.
In terms of its timeline, I don't think that we'll even see the brink of that. You know, 5+ years.
Okay.
I just think that there's too many things to knit together, you know, for people, and I'm not quite sure. I haven't researched it, but I'm not sure that the consumers want to have that degree of you know, virtual interface, you know, in their kitchen. I think it's a great fundamental question to ask. You know, at some point, tech for tech's sake doesn't really matter. You know? What is the value? You know, what is it really solving? Is it making my life easier somehow?
Yeah.
So I think we'd have to find out, you know, whether people really perceive the value, so you really know where to juice it.
Yeah. Are there things in terms of, so, you know, we've touched this a couple of times, right? And we talk about how everything is glass and smooth.
Yeah.
But is there applications where we should be roughing it up a bit more, right? Like, is it, everybody likes the sleek and shiny, but are there instances where having a bit more jagged or a bit more, I mean, not deadly, but like, you know, a rougher surface can help people navigate their way around the kitchen and their appliances and all of those things?
Sure, just with usability.
Yeah,
so,
just with usability.
Absolutely. So I come back and say, all right, you know, if you're going to do any kind of precision task, you're going to use the, you know, you have a dumb hand and a smart hand.
Yeah.
And then on the smart hand, you've got 3 smart fingers, and they work a lot with each other, you know. So if you have a very dexterous task that you have to do, then I'm going to try to design something to use these 3 fingers, you know, in some kind of a trilateral. So, anyways.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, what are some of the is there anything that you're working on right now, like, that you can talk about that's just sort of more far out there? Like, whether it's in terms of coming up with new materials or applying old materials in new ways, or anything that's sort of like really in the labs that you're looking at?
Yeah. So robotics is a busy space for us right now.
Okay.
Not in this industry, but in the medical environment. So we're doing a lot of work there, and that's pretty fascinating because you are on the bleeding edge of technology there. Yeah. And you're playing with some pretty advanced roboticists that are trying to replicate human motion, you know, in very miniature parts. We're doing some pretty cool research in the boomer population. You know, I think it's becoming more and more important to me as I age. But I think it's a tremendous opportunity to design products that don't strip your dignity as you get older. Yeah. With good design. So that whole opportunity space is low-hanging fruit. Yeah. For someone in this industry to go after. I think just making things easier to use for that crowd too doesn't need to make it look like it's for an old person. Sure. So don't strip the dignity out of the design as well.
Does it, this is just like an honest question, does the sense of touch diminish as you get older?
Yeah, it does. So what happens is your hands prune, you know, it's, and you lose kind of that soft, fleshy part of your fingertips. Yeah. So what I see happening a lot is that the younger designers are putting textures on grips and things, and they've got a healthy hand. Yeah. And then you put it in my mom's hand, and those little bumps that I can't feel, they feel like mountains in their point loads because she doesn't have the padding anymore, and they dig into her fingertips. So I think there's textures play a big role. Another one is size, because as you age, you know, you lose a lot of strength and you lose range of motion. So the functional envelope of your hand, where it used to be out in here, is now kind of, you know, zoning into a smaller area. So it does influence grip size. Eye-hand coordination comes into play with it as well. You know, what kind of visual feedback do you need to have to really execute the task, and how do you design those visual cues into the product so that I know I grab it here and I press and I do this. Yeah.
I'll flip the spectrum on the other end. Is there something, is there a difference as you're growing up? So
yeah. So what happens when you grow, the way that you acquire coordination, control, and skill is you've probably seen how a baby walks. They kind of walk like Frankenstein when they're learning to walk. Well, what they've done is that they've locked out their knees and they've locked out their ankles, and they start with the joints closest to their core, which are their hip joints. And then once they figure out how to use the hip joints, then they'll start to free up the knee joints, and then they'll free up the ankle joints. The same thing happens in your hands. So as a kid is trying to acquire skills, they learn how to do gross motor control, and it's not until a child is around 4, 5 do they start to pick up the fine motor control characteristics of their hand. So a great example is the classic pill bottle design that my mom can't get into at 91. She can push and she can turn, but she's so weak now. She can't do it. And she's got terrible hands. She has arthritis. Compare that now with a young kid. They can push and they can turn, but they can't push and turn because in their brain they haven't been able to knit those two actions together into one fluid motion.
Gotcha.
So knowing that that's how that evolves, you can start to design in these barriers to entry to make them child resistant.
Interesting. Yeah. I don't want to hog everything. Does anybody have any questions here? This is a fascinating discussion. Anyone? No? Okay, that's fine. Where are you seeing, so you talked about the toothbrush, and off stage we talked about like your work with Gatorade bottles and other kinds of things. Where are you seeing your work wind up in the kitchen? Where could people notice stuff that you've done?
So we've done some interesting things in the pots and pans area. We had a fascinating experience working with the Pujols Foundation. Pujols is a big baseball player when he was in St. Louis, and their foundation is to put money back into the women in the Dominican Republic where he grew up. So we worked with that foundation to design a line of pots and pans and utensils that are sold through their foundation, and the profits of that is then used to go back to the Dominican Republic, along with every set is matched with a set that goes back to the DR. So that was quite an exciting experience for me because there's not too many opportunities to design more stuff for the shelf that actually gives back. So that's exciting. We've done some things in the commercial space with knives and scissors. We've done some things that I'm still trying to forget in the poultry factories, with shears.
I can only imagine.
You haven't lived until you've cut chickens on the line, and
I'd say I've lived pretty well, without having experienced that.
Yeah, you don't need that.
Are there any materials that are becoming more scarce? Like I've read about sort of an issue with silicone. No?
I don't know. I'm not a materials guy, so I just don't monitor that.
I just didn't know, like, as you are looking to design products, right? So you're saying before you could use less rubber, right? You don't have to rubberize the entire handle. You could do less. And so as you are sourcing materials, if there are materials that are becoming more expensive, as you are trying to design something, and so that may impact how you design?
Well, the material that is really beautiful, but it's really expensive is carbon graphite. Or anything that has a carbon weave in it. It offers a lot of promise with strength and weight. But it's still up there in the stratosphere. It's pretty untouchable for mass market applications.
And is that because we've talked about that? I mean, we've talked about that. I feel like I've heard about that material for a long time. Is that just on a slow arc down, or is it waiting for some big breakthrough that's going to?
There's going to be a tipping point. Part of it is manufacturing and being able to control the weave. Ideally, you want to be able to control the weave as you put it down in all directions, not just in a layered fashion, because that gives you better three-dimensional strength. So that's where they're trying to iron out some really tough production issues.
And before we go, are there any trends that you're seeing sort of in your area of design, right? So you focus on what we touch and how we interact with it physically. Is there anything that you think people should know, like that's either coming in the pike or something that you've learned in as you've created things?
Well, my takeaway from this show is that I see a lot more retro coming back. So, it kind of asks, a broader question, is that a revolt to all of the digital technology that is eating away at all the other corners of our lives? And we just want to get back to analog? I don't know. But it's an interesting one to to chat around a table.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for your time, Dr. Bryce Rudder.
Thank you.